Samtato Jayodira. Nashta Prayashu Badresu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Uttamashoki Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtaki. Nigama Kapadul Garitam Param Shukamakarad Ridham Divata Bhagavatam Rashamaliyam Mahora Hora Sikubuvi Bhavaham. Krishna Sadamapagate Dhammagene Karonasta Dushamasho Paranako Dunodidam. Tramapia Dabashuta Vishatam Vibu Samapia Navidambi Duxaram Prakyahi Duhur Maharadidadmanam Sanklesha Nirvana Musanti Nanyataham. Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinubandhu Jigapate Gopisha Gopika Kanta Radhikanta Namostate Jayatam Sarito Pango Mamadir Matirgati Matsavashaparambo Jaradhara Madhana Mohanam Siman Rasarasarambi Vamsi Bada Karsan Venu Sinubago Gopanata Sriyasaram Divyad Brindarani Kapadrumada Srimad Ratnagada Shima Sanisto Shri Siddhara Shila Govinda Prestadobi Sevamanu Rami Namo Brahmanya Devaya Go Brahmanya Taya Chajigaritaya Krishnaya Govinaya Namo Namaha Mangalang Bhagavan Vishnu Mangalam Gudhadraja Mangalam Panadikaksho Mangalayatano Hari Om Narayanaya Vidmahi Vasadevaya Dimahi Tano Vishnu Prachodhyate Om Mahadevi Chavidmahi Vishnu Padnichadimahi Tano Lakshmi Prachodhyate Mahalakshmi Namastubhyam Sare Sare Hari Priya Namastubhyam Dayadire Tapta Kanchana Govanagira Vindavaneshwari Vishavanasute Devi Pradamani Hari Priya Nama Om Vishnu Paraya Krishna Pastaya Bhutare Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swami Dinamani Namaste Sarasati Devi Gauravani Pacharini Nirvishes Sanihari Paskada Desaradine Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Shiva Sari Gaur Bhakta Vindam Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Good morning, Carmen. Good morning, John. Good morning, Bobby, and good morning, Brent, as well as good morning on Zoom to Rob. Motivational Monday, as far as I know, it's November 27th. And the title of our talk this morning is The Home Field Advantage. As you may have heard from previous discussions, the fight between Gajendra the elephant and the crocodile lasted for 1,000 years, and that's by the calculation of the demigods. On the planet of the demigods, the heavenly planets, where the Trikuta mountain is located and all these events transpired, 1 day of the demigods is equal to our 6 months. So we can only imagine by our calculation how many tens of thousands of years this fight lasted. And during the course of the fight, as time went on and on and on, Gajendra spent more and more time in the water. Sometimes he was able to pull the crocodile back in the direction of the shore, but he was never able to get himself out of the water, nor the crocodile. Sometimes the crocodile was getting him deeper in the water, and sometimes he was getting himself to somewhat more shallow area, but he wasn't successful in getting himself out of the water. And so what in this tug of war that lasted for 1,000 years by the calculations of demigods, the crocodile was trying to pull Gajendra into the water, and Gajendra's trying to retreat back onto the land. And it's also said in some of the commentaries that some of the male elephants had Gajendra's tail, and they were trying to help out to pull Gajendra back. But the elephant's tail is not a lot to get a hold of, and apparently that had they did minimal amount of good to Gajendra. So he's being pulled on the front by the crocodile, being pulled on the back by the other elephants. What this all comes down to is who's going to get the home field advantage. Elephant's home field advantage is on the land, and the crocodile's home field advantage is on the water. Why such a big deal? In sports, contests, soccer, football, rugby, the biggest advantage is generally considered the home field advantage. Statistics show that the team that plays at home has a 60 to 65% of winning. And away, it's more like a 35% of winning. Same field, same length, same breadth, same number of people in the stadiums, same game, same football, and the same opponents that you face at home. When you face them in their home field, the odds are stacked more in their favor. Right now, it's football season, I'm aware. Now, in the NFL, there are 12 brutal games played during what they call the regular season. Brutal games, chance of injury, losing players from the roster, having to fill in, all this juggling, all this trouble. So what, and then they all have to play again in the playoffs. So one might think, well, why don't you skip what you call the regular season, just go right to the playoffs? Well, there are two advantages. The whole regular season, brutal 12 games, determines two things, which obviously these are going to be important. It determines who gets a bye in the playoffs, who does not have to play the first round. And the second thing, it determines when the top team from the regular season plays, the first game they're going to play is at home. So to get a bye and to get home field advantage, all that, the whole regular season is about getting those two advantages in the playoffs. So obviously, it's a big deal. Those are big, big perks. I was thinking about this subject matter earlier this morning, and I have to share that the Spanish Fork Temple and later on the Salt Lake Temple were conceived and constructed and opened for this very same reason. I did book distribution for many years in Australia and for several years in America after I returned. And I was always uncomfortable approaching people in malls, in parking lots, in the airport. I always try to be very polite, very respectful. I never, as far as I know, upset anybody by my approaching them. But I was always aware that they didn't come to the airport, they didn't come to the mall, they didn't come to the parking lot to get a book. They had other things in the forefront of their mind. They had other things on their to-do list, and getting a book from Hare Krishna was not one of them. Most times it worked out well, based on the sensitivity and the diplomacy of the devotee. In most cases, people are okay with it. In fact, it can be life-changing. It can turn someone's life totally around, and it has on many, many occasions. But I always felt a little unsettled being in parking lots and malls because, as you know, that's not the home field advantage. So similarly, a sports team that's playing, a team whose home is in Cleveland when they're playing in Detroit, when they're playing in Green Bay, and there's just a minimum amount of their fans in the stands, and most of the stands are filled with partisans of the local team, they also have to feel just a slight bit uneasy. Don't you agree? And then we have the roaring of the crowd, the favoritism of the local crowd sometimes is so loud that they can't even hear their own signal calling. And that also sets them at a disadvantage. They get delay of game penalties. They get other handicaps put on them during the course of playing at somebody else's field. So I always felt that, and the pressure built up, the more years I would go out, the more I yearned and hankered for the home field advantage. So I realized that if we were going to do that, we would have to strike off on our own. And so we left the Los Angeles temple, came to Utah, and Krishna smiled on our efforts. Krishna also wanted us to have the home field advantage. What does the home field advantage translate into? Instead of going out somewhere and diverting someone's attention from the purpose for which they are in that area, and bringing them to focus on you and your book in a foreign, alien environment, you get people walking through the door. They have taken upon themselves to come to this temple. They've seen a sign, they've seen something on Google, they've seen one of our billboards, they've heard the radio station, they've heard by word of mouth from a friend that's visited, they've been to a color festival. They come of their own volition to the temple. They spend the money for the gas, they take their own time, and they come through the door and they want to find out more about it. To me, that's heaven. To me, that's the fulfillment of a lifelong dream, to have people come to you. And the only way you can do that is to have your own property arranged and organized and decorated according to your own taste. Ideally, you build a bona fide, genuine temple from the ground up with all the architectural beauties and features and decorations and embellishments. You build a rep as a tourist destination, as a festival venue, as a cultural resource, and then you're off and running. You don't have to go out onto foreign territory. You can stay right in the temple. And when people come through the door, you're available to ask any questions they might have. Everything about the temple property is evocative of Krishna consciousness. The landscaping, the architecture, the food, the devotees, the dress, the costumery, the art on the wall, the sculpture. We even have a African gray parrot named Ramu. We've had him for 7 years now. He was donated by a Gujarati family from Los Angeles. And he says about 100 times a day, Hare Krishna. When people come in the door, they hear this, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. They look around. Who's saying that? Where's that coming from? It's a huge advantage. Why take all the trouble? Think of how many books, it took $1.2 million to build the Spanish Fork Temple in 1998 to 2001. And just think about, the 3 years it took to build the temple, all the money it took to raise the money, do the fundraising, build the temple. Some critic, some hardcore devotee might say, well, just think of all the books you could have distributed. You could have distributed $1.2 million worth of books during that time instead of wasting that money on a building. But once you have the building, your influence is so much greater. When you have that building to back you up, you have a context, you have a place for people to land after they read a book. It is so much more powerful than just presenting a book, which is, after all, theoretical, and not having any place, not having your own stadium. Imagine a sports team that did not have its own stadium. It didn't even have its own home field. So every single game on this schedule is an away game. Imagine the disadvantage, the constant travel, facing antagonistic crowds wherever you go. Wherever you go, if you're lucky, 10% of the fans are in favor of you and 90% of the fans are yelling for your blood. How demoralizing that's going to be over a period of time. It would be impossible, in my opinion, for a team without a home stadium, a team that can't play at least 50% of its games in its home field with its own fans and its own partisans and its own momentum. It would be possible to put together a winning season. So in my mind, going out and just doing book distribution without simultaneously building beautiful temples, it'd be like a team always playing away and not having a home field and never enjoying the home field advantage. So I'm so happy to see around America temples opening after decades, perhaps as many as 60 years of living in a rented property, a former office building, a former church, or a ramshackle property, or a former mansion in Tuaco, New Jersey. The temple they've had there, I think I visited that temple in 1976, and it was over 100 years old then. The wiring is substandard. It's a fire trap. It could go up at any moment. I'm not gonna knock on wood, but they'll be out of there next year, building a beautiful $15 million temple headed up by Manan Gopal and Parsippany. I couldn't be happy for them. It's about time, I would say. Baltimore opened a temple several years ago from the ground up, and they're off and running. Tell you, it's a whole new level. Chicago, Naperville, they opened a temple, beautiful temple built from the ground up. I went to the Festival of Colors in Columbus, Ohio, and I was hosted by Prem Vilas, a doctor there, and he took us out to the site of their temple. It's a $12 million temple, which should be open in about a year's time. Washington, D.C. is opening a temple in March of 2024. In India, the Temple of Vedic Understanding, a $50 million project, is scheduled to open early in 2025. As far as I'm concerned, book distribution and temple should be given equal stress, because if you don't have any place, if you don't have any home field to play for your resident devotees, and if you don't have any place to take people back to, if you don't have any context, then you're at a great disadvantage, and it's hard to keep up your numbers. It's hard to keep, it's hard to have a winning mentality, and it's hard to keep up the morale. So a lot of missionary work, just like in sports, is dependent upon being in the right place. Even if you have a weakness, even if you don't have the strength of those people with whom you're contending, or those people with whom you're trying to share your culture, if you're located well, if you have a good location, if you have a good situation, that can make up for a lack of innate strength. The first question that Dritrarasthra asked of Sanjaya in the Bhagavad Gita has to do with, are my sons in the right place at the right time? Dharma, kshetra, Kurukshetra, samavetyuch, mamakas pandavacha, tima gata samjayahu. Now, on one level, that question doesn't make sense, because obviously Dhritarashtra knows that his sons are about to fight the Kauravas. I mean, the Pandavas. That his sons, the Kauravas, are about to fight the Pandavas. He knows that. Everything has been building up to that for at least 15 years, intensified by his son cheating the Pandavas out of their kingdom, sending him in exile for 13 years. So obviously, they're assembled to fight. The Pandavas made many efforts at peace, but Duryodhana rejected all of them. Duryodhana didn't want compromise. He didn't want to share the kingdom. He wanted nothing less than the extermination of the whole Pandava race. Kind of reminds you of something that's happening at the present moment. Certain party doesn't want to negotiate. They don't want their own state. They don't take the charitable funds which have been giving them to build a future for themselves, for their children, to educate them and all like that. They're not going to be interested in any overtures of peace, because their agenda is the extermination of their opponents. From the river to the sea has a much more ominous meaning than those who chanted in the streets realize. So obviously, the Pandavas and the Kauravas are assembled on the battlefield to fight. It was an agenda that Duryodhana refused to negotiate. He refused to compromise on it. Even as children, he tried to kill the Pandavas in multiple ways, and he still hasn't backed off. He still hasn't changed from that agenda. He wants to exterminate the Pandavas. So Dhritarashtra's real question is the place. It has to do not with the opponents and their relative strengths, but it has to do with the place. And there's a deep concern in Dritrarasthra. The subtext of this question, Dharma, kshetra, Kurukshetra, samavetu yuksava, kima gorata samjaya. Dharma, kshetra, Kurukshetra, the location where this conflict is going to take place is Kurukshetra. It's a field about 90 kilometers or 50 miles north of Delhi. And it's a big open field where the warriors went to settle their differences. Note, none of the wars in this era involved any of the citizens. In those days, it would be unconscionable for any warrior to even consider or think of dragging the citizens into these conflicts. That was unheard of, unprecedented. It's only in the modern age that we've become such cowards that we hide underground and use humans and hospitals and schools as our shields. That's a whole nother subject matter for another day. But when there were wars to be fought, only warriors, that's why they're called warriors, because warriors are supposed to fight wars. There's not supposed to be civilian casualties, not even one. What to speak of elderly, what to speak of women, what to speak of children. There should be no casualties from the non-combatants, and their residences, their fields, their farms should be untouched. Take it. It's like, it's almost stereotypical. You're in a bar, restaurant, and there's these macho guys, and they're arguing most likely over a girl, a woman. What do they say when they realize it's going to come to force, fisticuffs? They say, take it outside. Yes, there's a certain logic to that. There's a certain standard to that. Let's take it outside. Let's not disturb the patrons, the women, the children, the old people that might be here. We have an issue, so let's settle it in a neutral place, somewhere apart from the citizenry. So Kurukshetra is the place where they would take it so as not to affect negatively the populations, the cities, the farms, and the agricultural areas. Now, when there weren't wars being fought there, this was an area which was considered to be a special chakra, a special vortex of purificatory energy. And it was a place, Dharma kshetra, where many, many sacrifices had been performed, where many, many sages throughout the ages had gone to perform their austerities and their penances. It had an aura, it had a vibration of purity and righteousness. And so Dritrarasthra was deeply disquieted. He was deeply concerned. He says, Dharma kshetra, Kurukshetra. That was the first word out of his mouth. His sons were adharmic. In Sanskrit, if you put an A in front of something, it negates it. So Dharma means those who do their duty, those who are honest, those who do an honest day's work for an honest day's wages, who will not cut corners, who will not wander into ethical gray areas, who will not compromise their principles, who will not put innocent people at risk. That does not describe Dhritarashtra's son, Duryodhana, and his brothers. They are adharma. All that's righteous, all that's good, all that's honest, all that's straightforward is missing in the hearts and minds of his 100 sons headed up by Duryodhana. Duryodhana is another name for crooked. If Duryodhana had a middle name, it would be crooked. He never does anything straightforward. So Dhritarashtra, having paternal affection for his sons, feels correctly that this is a bad omen. His sons have huge strength. They've been consolidating the kingdom, forming alliances, paying off, essentially bribing the greatest warriors of the day, like Karna, like Bhisma, like Dronacharya, Sakuni, paying them off, basically bribing them that when the Pandavas dragged themselves out of exile, being weakened by living on roots and herbs in the forest, sleeping on the ground, will you support me in the coming war? Will you join with me to create an army, the power and talent of which has never been seen in the history of the world, with the end purpose of exterminating, stamping out the Pandavas once and for all? He had 14 years with which to use all the wealth, all the influence, all the leverage of being the king in Hastinapur against the Pandavas. From a physical point of view, from a point of view of martial advantage, Duryodhana couldn't have had a more peachy position. He couldn't have had the odds more in his favor. The bookies in Vegas would have given him at least 20-1 odds. And aside from the very talent, the very lethal personalities he had in his army, he had about 3 soldiers for every 2 of the Pandavas. So from that point of view, Duryodhana was in an enviable position. There's hardly any way that you could imagine in the natural he would lose. But location, home field advantage is so important. You can arrive at an opponent's stadium with more talents, more MVPs, more first-round draft picks. You can have a more talented quarterback, more talented ends, more talented defensive men in form of linebackers and cornerbacks, but you're fighting an uphill battle, because in that stadium, there's going to be a certain comfort, a certain familiarity that the home team has. And in the stands, there's going to be an overwhelmingly greater number, a disproportionate number of people who are favorable to the home team, and they're going to be full-throated. They're going to be shouting their lungs out. Dhritarashtra is no dummy. He knows that in spite of the obvious advantages in terms of numbers, in terms of firepower, and in terms of talent, this can all be neutralized by the location. And considering that Kurukshetra is a place where righteousness prevails throughout the ages, it is, the name Kurukshetra is synonymous. It's spoken in the same breath. Dharma kshetra, Kurukshetra. It doesn't look good. From the very first verse, from in fact the first line, from the first 4 words of the Bhagavad Gita, which extends for 700 verses, from the first 4 words, it's starting not to look very good for the Kauravas, and it's portending victory for the Pandavas. And also Dritrarasthra, throughout the whole saga of his son conspiring against the Pandavas, committing so many crimes against them, Dritrarasthra was a good man. He knew his sons were off track. He knew that they were doomed. They were on a fast track to disaster. He listened receptively to the advice of Bhisma, to the advice of Dronacharya, to the advice of his brother Vidura. He agreed with them. He sympathized with them. He tried on multiple occasions to get Duryodhana to compromise, to back down. In the end, a father wants to protect his son, and he knew that Duryodhana is on a course of disaster, a course of collision, and he did his level best on many occasions to try to talk some sense into Duryodhana. But unfortunately, his affection was his undoing. His unnatural affection for his son was undoing. On one occasion, Krishna had sent a kuru to Hastinapur to see how the Pandavas were doing. At this time, the Pandavas were youngsters. They'd been recalled after the death of their father Pandu in the forest, and they were living amongst so many enemies in Hastinapur. Small teenage boys, 12, 13 years old, with only their mother, Kunti, to look after their well-being, and surrounded by all kinds of enemies on every side. Krishna was concerned. And so he charged Akrura with going to Hastinapur, meeting with Kunti, feeling out Duryodhana, talking with Dritrarasthra, looking after the safety and protection of the Pandavas, who are the best friends of Krishna. And at that time, Akrura tried to talk Dritrarasthra out of his unnatural affection for his son. One should naturally be affectionate for one's son, But if that son is a criminal, if that son is on a course which is going to cause the destruction of an entire dynasty, you have to cut him loose. What is it? It said, to save a family, you can sacrifice one family member. To save a village, you can sacrifice a family. To save a state, you can sacrifice a family. And to save the country, you can sacrifice a state. So here is an entire dynasty. Here is a world regime, the seat of government of which is Hastinapur. The entire well-being of the world is at stake, and Dritrarasthra is not willing to sacrifice this one crooked offspring of his. It is said, Uttamas chirinam koya proktakaram adamasara akarto charitam pidu. When Yayati was asking his 5 sons, Yayati had been cursed with premature old age because he was diddling around with Sarmista, the maidservant of his duly married wife. I forget her name. Devahut. No. Anyway, you know the story. So he asked his 5 sons if because he wanted to continue to enjoy sense gratification with his wife, he asked his 5 sons, beginning from the oldest Yadu down to the youngest Puru, if they wouldn't take his premature age so that he could enjoy a few more years, and then he would take it back again from them when he was satisfied. So his sons refused him, and at that time he said, he said, that son who anticipates his father's desire. Bhisma, for instance, just from noticing the behavior of his father Santanu, he knew that Santanu wanted to get remarried. He didn't force Santanu to come and ask him permission to remarry. He knew Santanu wanted to get remarried. He went and found out the father of the lady, Satyavati, that he wanted to marry. He found the father's conditions, and he voluntarily gave up his right to the kingdom. Over and above that, he made a vow of celibacy. He did all this for his father without his father having had to ask him. That is a first-class son. And Yati goes on to explain that after being asked, a son who does things willingly is a second-class son. Then after having been asked, a son who does what his father wants begrudgingly is a third-class son. And finally, that son who refuses to do what his father asks him is like stool. Is like stool or urine. The urine comes from the same passage as the semen, but the urine is just waste matter. So by this standard, Duryodhana should have been discarded. He was worthless. Not only was he worthless, but his actions are going to lead to the disruption of the entire world order. Millions of soldiers were going to die. They were going to leave their wives widow. They were going to leave their sons orphans. So many children were going to be orphaned. So many single women would no longer have a man to protect her. As a result, future generations would be unwanted children, Banu Sankara. Now here's Duryodhana. He refused to follow the advice of his father. When Akrura told Dritrarasthra, and many other people had told him the same thing, that he needed to cut himself off from his son. And Akrura's word, Neya Chatvacha Shambasha, Neya Chatvacha Nakachi Karichit Chatru, Putrenanaragaram, Vidyat Sandanamamira. Akrura's words were very, very true, very sober. He said, you know, you're trying to hang on to your son against all odds, in spite of the fact that he doesn't listen to you, he doesn't listen to anybody, he's on a collision course of disaster. He says, you should not try and hang on to your relatives, because they will be dispersed in due course of time. We come together like bits of cottons in a little tiny whirlwind for one lifetime, according to the results of our previous karma, and then we're dispersed again, never to see each other again. So the family circle, the connections that we have with our sons and our cousins and our aunts and our uncles and our fathers are temporary. You cannot maintain them. And Kuru went on to say that you cannot even keep hold of your own body. You're going to be forced at the time of death out of your body. What to speak, you can't even keep hold of your own body. What to speak of the bodies of your children, your grandchildren, your spouse, and so on and so forth. Kuru says it doesn't make sense to hold on to Duryodhana and to continue to put up with his lip, his smart aleckness, to say the very least. Dritrarasthra, hold all this. And he said, Tatapi sunyatya shoma, aridyam nakashit, putra nariveshamaram, vidyat punji sandami maham. He says, I recognize the truth of their words. I recognize that you speak to me out of a sense of you want to benefit me. You're my well-wisher, and you're the well-wisher of all the warriors and all the kings, and you're even the well-wisher of Duryodhana, because he's headed for disaster. But in spite of that, your words cannot find a place in my heart. Putrena, because I have become, rather than the son, the natural way of things is for the son to see the father as his guru, to see the order of the father as incontrovertible, indisputable. It's a natural order of things. But in this verse, Dritrarasthra says to Kuru, your words do not find a place in my heart any more than lightning stays within a cloud. Lightning flashes in this cloud and it flashes in that. Lightning never stays within a cloud. As lightning never stays within a cloud, I accept your words, but I don't keep them. I don't act upon them. They come in and they go away. Why? Because rather than being a follower of righteousness, I recognize righteousness, I acknowledge rightness, I believe in rightness, but I do not follow righteousness. I recognize your good advice. I recognize that you're a well-wisher. I recognize that what you're telling me is for my own good and for the good of Duryodhana and for all living people, but I don't follow it. How many people are in that category? I believe that you shouldn't drive over 70 miles an hour. I believe that. I recognize that. I accept that driving 70 miles an hour is the best speed for the safety and well-being of people, but I don't do it. I drive 90 miles an hour. I weave in traffic recklessly. I recognize that 70 miles an hour is a good speed limit. It's the best for the majority of people, but I personally don't follow it. How many people do we have like that? How many people do we have like that? And Dritrarasthra said to Kuru, I accept your advice. I recognize the truth of it. I know that you're coming from a place of concern, that you're a well-wisher, but I can't accept it. And so he knows that because of the location of Kurukshetra, it's a bad omen for his sons. From the first 4 words of the 700 verse Bhagavad Gita, Dritrarasthra recognized that his sons are adharmic. The sons of Pandu, being devotees of Krishna, are dharmic. And so if anybody has the upper hand, if anybody has the home field advantage at Dharma kshetra, Kurukshetra, it would be the Pandavas. And Dritrarasthra, somehow or other, against all hope, against all experience, he's wishing that Duryodhana will have a change of heart, that Duryodhana coming into this sanctified area to fight for an illicit cause will somehow or other see the error of his ways and give up the cause. And at the 11th hour, offer the olive branch to the Pandavas. He knows he's never going to do it, but he's hoping against hope because ultimately he loves his son. and he wants the best for his son. But his son doesn't know what is in his own best interest. That's the problem. So one question was asked in ancient times. A sage asked another sage this question: can an ant touch the moon? The moon is up there, thousands of miles away, hung in the sky. And an ant is bound to the ground. It's a little tiny insignificant creature that goes here and there, traverses an area, a diameter, which is probably not more than a few feet. It would seem that there is no way that the ant can touch the moon. Similarly, it would seem that there's no way that the Pandavas, being weakened by 13 years of exile and gathering them around themselves, what few allies that hadn't already been preempted by Duryodhana, it seemed as if there's no way they could defeat the Kauravas. Just like it seems like there's no way an ant can touch the moon. But there is a way the ant can touch the moon. Can you imagine what it is? This is our riddle of the day. There is a way the ant can touch the moon. What is that? If that ant is on the head of Lord Shiva. Because the moon is also on the head of Lord Shiva. So if the ant is located, if the location of the ant is correct, if he's in the right place at the right time, the ant can touch the moon. I bow to Shiva, love and respect. I invoke him with the slogans Kamanoma and connect in devotion, because he's always in effect in deep meditation with a snake around his neck. He's the husband of Parvati Mahashakti. He rides the white bull of Vilkanani. He's the father of Ganapati, Mr. Mahadev. The Ganges flows down from the crown of his head. A crescent moon rests right next to his dreads. He's the god of the dead, covered in ash, with a smile on his face, and his compassion is best. A crescent moon rests right next to his dreads. So if the ant is in amongst his dreads, that ant can touch the moon. So we say location, location, location. The Pandavas, in spite of all their disadvantages, they have found a favorable ground to face their challengers, their betrayers, their backstabbing enemies. Similarly, the crocodile has found a favorable environment. The crocodile is not the enemy of Gajendra. Gajendra needs to be defeated. He needs to have his material pride cut down. He needs to be taken out of the circle of male elephants, female elephants. He needs to realize that at the time of death, none of their associates, none of those family members is going to be able to help us. We have to face death alone. We have to fly our plane alone. The crocodile is not the enemy of Gajendra. The crocodile is in the right place at the right time for executing the purpose of the Lord, which is to present Gajendra with a life-threatening situation, whereby the remembrance of his previous life comes to the surface. And in a few sessions, very soon, we're going to get to the 3rd chapter in the 8th canto of the Bhagavad Gita, where we hear Gajendra's stuti. Gajendra, actually, his conscience becomes revived to the point where he remembers the prayers that he offered to the Lord in his previous life as Imdadumna Maharaj. But to get to that point, Gajendra's got to realize that this material world does not give you the home field advantage. There's only one outcome in this material world. From all your wealth, all your strength, all your fame, all your land, all your family members, all your personal body strength. If you forget Krishna in all of this, there's only one outcome, and that is to be demoralized and to be defeated. Who has not used this material body and the talents, intelligence which one has been gifted with, who does not use that for awakening and reviving one's eternal dormant Krishna consciousness, however high they rise in the material estimation, the conclusion of their life is it is a life which ends in defeat. Krishna does not want that for Gajendra, so he sends the crocodile to revive the consciousness of his previous life and to bring him back home, back to God. So that's our discussion today for Motivational Monday. Scroll over here. See. Thank you very much. Shukshma says that would be one fortunate ant where he on Lord Shiva's head and able to touch the moon. The same is true for us. You know, we're born in families of meat eaters and basically drinkers and smokers, and some or other we're like ants that, because of having met Prabhupada and situate ourselves in the Krishna conscious movement, we're like ants that are able to touch the moon. Vaibhavi says, awesome analogy. Yeah, the whole talk was basically an analogy, and that's why we called it the home field advantage. Devyani, yes, Devyani. I would think Devaki was coming into mind, Devahuti was coming into mind. I was reaching. Yes, Devyani. Devyani was the wife of Yayati, whom he cheated on, got cursed with premature decrepitude. John Malik says, we make a living by what we get. We make a life by what we give. Love another. Yes. So many well-wishers for Duryodhana and Dritrarasthra. But they were bent on the downward course. Chad, Hare Krishna. Can we talk inbox, please, more about my ministry? Yeah. Sorry, John, we're not here for that purpose, but we wish you luck. Natasha, thanks for joining us. Malati, Columbus Temple projected opening is 2025. That makes sense because 18 months and they started in August. So August of 2024 would be 12 months. Yeah, so spring of 2025. And from what Prem Vilas told me and showed me, he said, very good company in undertaking the construction. He's very hopeful that they will be on schedule. Bhai Bobby said, lots of books go out from the temple that folks treasure. Yes, talk about the home field advantage. We still do lots of books, but we do them right from our own gift store, which is a blessing, both for the recipients and both for ourselves as well. What else do we have? Lots of good comments. Brent says, you can avoid damage if you can manage the home field advantage. Don't just roam, invite people to your home temple, tell them about Krishna. Love it. I love that, Brent. You can avoid damage if you can manage the home field advantage. Don't just roam, invite people to your home temple to tell them about Krishna. See, you could have just saved the last 45 minutes. We could have had that poem and that would have been it. It took me 45 minutes to subscribe. When Brent writes down, you could read it in 5 seconds. You can avoid damage if you can manage the home field advantage. Don't just roam, invite people to your home temple, tell them about Krishna. Excellent, excellent. Yeah, Shukshma talks about football, brutality. Americans love it. Instead of Sunday worship, yeah, time, just like trying to talk sense into Duryodhana, how his time could be better spent, or talking sense into Dritrarasthra, his time could be better spent. The biggest waste of time is zombieing out on a Sunday and watching people give themselves brain damage. The head is not meant to crash into other bodies which are traveling at high velocity. The head is given to you. It's a delicate organ, a delicate instrument. And if you use it properly, you can go back to home, back to Godhead with that gift that Krishna has given you. Now, improper use of the head is to smash it into other bodies. 50% of people that go up into the NFL have some measure of permanent brain damage. Ask yourself the question, in spite of its popularity, in spite of the income that it generates, in spite of the salaries and the millions of dollars that the players get, is it worth it? Is it worth it to come into your 40s, your early 40s, your mid 40s and 50, and your life, you have no short-term, long-term memory recall? Some can't even remember their names. Is it worth it? And the answer is no. It says that even if one is the most successful Hall of Famer, the best paid athlete in the history of the sport, is it worth it being a vegetable or going in that direction at the young age of 40 or 50 or even 55 or even 60? I'm 77, and I'm just starting to realize the potential that my brain has. I'm just getting very excited about doing live performances with long lyrical rap songs. You also, those of you who join me, several of you are the muse. The muse is becoming very prominent in you. Rob, Carmen, Brent, Vaibhavi. I'm leaving someone out. Who am I missing? Who's been very good with Natasha also. Natasha's been very good with the lyrics. Okay. Yeah, thanks for that comment about how Americans love brutality. We are the living graves of murdered beasts, slaughtered to satisfy appetites. We never pause to wonder at our feasts if animals like humans have rights. We pray on Sundays, we have light. We pray on Sundays in front of the tube, watching people kill each other. We have a light to guide our footsteps on the path we tread. We're sick of war, we don't want to fight, and yet we gorge ourselves upon the dead. Good morning, Carmen. Good morning, Bobby, Malik. I think we've acknowledged everybody who's on the Facebook page. Now we go to Rob, the grand finale, whatever lyrics Rob has to send us off on this Motivational Monday. Turn it over to you, my man.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna.
I was only able to get a couple today, but I hope they're worth it.
I'm sure they are.
Strength is irrelevant when out of your element.
Good.
And too much attraction is the wrong direction. Turn your affection to spiritual reflection.
Yep, that was a problem with Dritrarasthra. Too much attachment, and his son was also too attached. He couldn't play second fiddle to anybody. He had to be foremost. And that's a problem. That's certainly a problem. This has been Motivational Monday, coming to you from the Home Field Temple in Spanish Fork, Utah. And if you're someone who goes to the Salt Lake City Temple, the same can be said. You have a wonderful temple, gorgeous architectural specimen, modeled after the successful temple in Spanish Fork, Utah, with which to favorably receive visitors, answer their questions, and ideally send them off with literature so they can pursue the path back to home, back to Godhead. See you tomorrow. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare.